I guess it's about time I started doing tier lists. Hey everyone, I'm Mariana, this is Impression Blend, and I am very excited to talk about one of my favorite things in the world of film, A24, specifically A24 horror. But instead of giving you a top 10, I decided it would be fun to rank every single A24 horror film in a tier list. I've never done a tier list before, so this should be interesting. Before we begin, I want to remind you that horror is a versatile genre, and particularly when it comes to A24 horror, the films that they choose often go for the more psychological side of things, for the atmosphere, for that feeling of unease and those unsettling concepts rather than the more obvious scares. So, because of that, I know there are going to be people who will argue that some of these are not horror, but they are. Horror is more than slashers, demons, and jump scares, and you don't have to take my word for it. For this video, I'm going with A24 films that are classified as horror on IMDb. There are a total of 19 films here at the moment. We are going in order of release as per the A24 website. Let's do this. Just to cover the tiers really quickly, I decided to come up with my own names for the tiers because that's more fun. So the top tier, which is the S tier, is called All Hail because we should all hail and worship these amazing horror films. Or at least I am going to because they are fantastic. The second tier I have here is Quality Nightmares, and this is pretty self-explanatory as well. They're really good horror films in my opinion, ones that I really enjoy. They're not quite at the level of my all-time favorites like the All Hail level, but I would absolutely 100% recommend these, and I think they're really, really good horror films. One-time scares is what I am calling kind of the mid-tier of things. The films that are pretty good, they're not bad horror films, but they're not all that special either. They're kind of that middle ground that are probably worth one viewing, and I don't regret spending time on them, but they're not amazing. Then we have No Sleep Lost, and those are films that I did not enjoy. They just were not for me. I could have just not seen them and been fine. Basically, on Letterboxd, this is something that I would rate a 2 out of 5 or a 4 out of 10 if you're going by my regular scale. And finally, the bottom tier is Would Offer as Sacrifice. These are the films that I just wish I didn't spend my time on at all, and honestly kind of wish they wouldn't have been made because I kind of hate them. I don't talk about films I hate very often on this channel, but they do exist. All right, on to the movies. So the first one I have here is Under the Skin. This is a very interesting and kind of a polarizing sci-fi horror film about an alien disguised as a human woman who is going around picking up men and then kind of sucking the life out of them in a way. You're just going to have to see it for yourself if you haven't seen the film yet. And by the way, I'm not going to be describing plot in a lot of detail for these films because there's 19 of them, looking at my laptop so I don't miss anything, and we will be here forever if I try to describe every single one of these in detail. So, Under the Skin is an interesting one because I did not love it when I first saw it, and it was kind of a middle-of-the-road film for me. However, after I first watched it, I read the book, which I have the coolest edition of. Hold on, let me show you. Look at this beauty. I hope you can tell that at certain angles there's a face that appears in this silver design, which is super cool. Love this edition, just got this recently. Anyways, the novel really clarified a lot of the questions I had for this film because it is very vague when it comes to a lot of elements of it and quite a few parts of the story. So the novel did help me understand it a lot better, and I just rewatched it a few days ago. It's been maybe 4 or 5 years since I watched it the first time, and I actually liked it a lot more the second time around. So I'm placing it in the Quality Nightmares tier right here. Next up here, I have Life After Beth, and this is a horror comedy that involves a zombie girlfriend played by Aubrey Plaza, whom I really adore, and I will pretty much watch anything she is in. The struggle I have with horror comedies is that it is really hard to find that balance where you're funny, but you're also a scary horror film, and usually they tend to be just a little bit too silly to truly be considered a horror film, and they turn out more like a dark comedy with gross stuff. And this one is definitely on that spectrum of things, but maybe it's Aubrey Plaza, maybe it's the cast, maybe it's the concept. I did enjoy this movie. I ended up rating it a 6 out of 10 when I watched it. So this is going right into my one-time scares tier. I think it's enjoyable. I think it's worth watching once, and I think certain people are going to have a lot of fun with it. I certainly did have some fun with it, obviously, but it is nowhere near my favorites. So there we are. Next, I have Tusk, and I know there are people out there who love Tusk. I'm just not one of them. Tusk is on the body horror spectrum, and this is a very strange concept because there's a mad scientist involved. You know, once again, if you haven't seen this movie, if you don't know what it's about, it's just best to go in not knowing anything about it because it's such a wild idea and how the whole Tusk thing ties into the story. This is also a Kevin Smith film, so generally if you're a fan of his work, you're probably going to enjoy this one. It was simply too weird for my taste, and I thought it was just a bizarre movie that was not for me. It's simply not for me. I don't think it's awful, though. I think some of it is not really that great. I don't think it's an awful film. However, for me personally, I'm not a big fan. So this is going right into my no sleep lost category. Literally, when I watched it, my reaction was, what the hell did I just watch? And that could be a good thing for some people. It was just not a good weird for me. I can just tell some people are already upset by this tier list. You haven't seen anything yet. There are more controversial opinions in there. Next up, one of my personal all-time favorite horror films, The Witch. You guys know how much I love The Witch. I talk about that a lot on this channel. If you haven't seen my top 10 horror films of the 2010s video, you should check it out right here. I will also link it in the info box below. By the way, if I have reviews for any of these, I will also link them in the info box below. As always, I do have reviews for some of these, even though not all of them, but yeah. There are some that exist, and you should check them out if you haven't. The Witch is set in New England in 1630s, and describing it as a New England folktale that is a horror film is the best way to talk about it. Obviously, witchcraft is involved, weird things are involved, a demonic goat is involved. I'm sure you've seen some of the imagery for The Witch, and it is, as I mentioned, one of my favorite horror films of all time, so obviously it is going into the all hail category. Love it so much, seen it at least 4 times at this point. Would love to watch it again sometime soon because I miss it. Next up, Green Room, another one of my big favorites. I love this film. It is more on the gory thriller side of things, but it is such a great nail-biting, just glued to your seat, cannot look away type of thriller that I often recommend it to anybody who hasn't seen it. This is basically about a punk band who goes to perform in front of a group of neo-Nazis, and they end up getting into some trouble, and it ends up being a survival situation. It's good stuff. And as you might have guessed, it is going into my all hail tier as well because I love it a lot, and because once again I've seen it multiple times and enjoyed it every time, and I own it on Blu-ray, so how could I possibly not put it in that tier? I do think it's one of the best A24 films overall, and it is actually my overall top 10 of A24. Next up, I have The Monster, and this is definitely the case of a really cool concept that just did not work out. It did not come together. It has a really cool idea behind it. It does try to draw an interesting parallel, and the monster is this metaphor for addiction, but it did not come together for me. It just did not click as a film. Don't think it worked well. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 10. I didn't find it particularly scary or particularly well made, so this is going into the no sleep lost category, unfortunately, and I personally would not recommend it. I was actually pretty bummed out that I didn't like it because on paper it sounds really cool and I love metaphoric horror, but no, sorry. Next, I have The Blackcoat's Daughter, and this one I feel like is kind of underrated. I don't think it's an amazing film, but I do think it's better than what people give it credit for. The issue is that it is pretty slow burn and it does require some patience to get to the more interesting stuff and some interpretation to get to its meaning, but I think it's a really cool story. It's basically about 2 girls who are spending their winter break at a prep school, and there is some sort of evil entity stalking them. That's all I'm going to say about that. I just know that there's an audience for this film that would really appreciate it, but because this is one of the lesser talked about A24 horror films, not too many people have seen it, and I think at least some of them are definitely missing out. It is for the fans of that atmospheric, very moody, slow burn horror, so if that's you, you should give it a try. I ended up rating it a 7 out of 10, and I am not sure where to put it. I think I'm still going to leave it in one-time scares just because I've never really felt like I need to watch it again. I think I'm going to leave it with the middle of the road stuff with one-time scares because I think my other quality nightmares films are significantly better. It's just that this one, there's just something about it that I really appreciated, and I loved that it didn't spoon feed the plot to the viewers. The director and the writer actually respected the viewer's intelligence. So I don't know, maybe I should rewatch it and maybe my opinion would change, but for now, one-time scares. Moving on. Oh, this is another interesting one. This is a film that was completely ruined by its marketing because we're talking about It Comes at Night. This was sold as a more action-packed horror film. This kind of happened to The Witch as well, but this one in particular, the people who went in to see it expected a completely different movie, and so they reasonably were disappointed by what they got. I actually happen to really, really like It Comes at Night. I think the atmosphere of dread and tension and the whole goal of this film is to demonstrate paranoia and fear. And I think it is so successful with that. I do agree that the ending is not the most satisfying thing, but at the same time, I completely understand why that is the ending that they went with because it goes along with the whole story. But as I said, I do understand if people think that it's not very satisfying. So I'm actually going to put this one in quality nightmares because I think if you go in with proper expectations for this one, you're going to appreciate it so much more. And I do think about coming back and seeing this one again. So that's where it's going. Next up, I have what I would consider one of the absolute worst A24 films and definitely my least favorite horror film by them. I actually don't know if you could fully consider this horror to begin with. I'm talking about Woodshock. I just watched it a couple of days ago and it was bad. It is pretty much about this character played by Kirsten Dunst who is depressed and sad and contemplating killing herself. That's the movie. There's no plot, really. There is no real characterization. There's no emotional development even. She's kind of one note the entire time. She's not really unraveling. Oh, this was putting me to sleep so badly. Look, I understand they were going for illustrating the character's mood and mental state, and there is a substance involved, but just no, this was not very good. Some of the shots are really pretty, but that's about it for what it has going for it. Also, it is classified as drama, fantasy, horror. There are some horror style influences on this film, but I would never classify this as a horror film. And this is coming from someone who said at the beginning of this video that horror is a versatile genre, but if you've seen this movie, I'm pretty sure you would not classify it as horror or fantasy, really. I have no idea what they were thinking with this. Fantasy, drama, horror. What are you talking about? This is going straight to my would offer a sacrifice tier because I kind of want my time back, to be honest. Next up, I have another controversial one because it is the killing of a sacred deer. I know there's a huge fan base for Yorgos Lanthimos in the film community, and I completely respect that his style works for you. It does not work for me. I have tried to love his films. I have seen Dogtooth. I have seen The Lobster. I have seen The Killing of a Sacred Deer twice because I was just determined to understand what about this attracts people so much and why I can't get into it. And the only film of his that I enjoy is The Favorite, and it is vastly different from his other films. I love it, actually. It's one of my favorite films. It's amazing. I just don't like his other stuff. For me, the issue is the deadpan dialogue delivery. It just does not work for me. When I watch films, I want to see human emotion. I want to see people really get into these characters. The whole letting story speak for itself and kind of giving it this like comedic vibe because nobody is really delivering their dialogue how they would in real life. It takes me out of it. I don't like it. It doesn't work for me. And that's that. I will say that in this film in particular, I think it works the best out of the Dogtooth, The Lobster, and The Killing of the Sacred Deer. This one I actually appreciated more than the other two, but no, I'm not a big fan. I'm sorry. I think it's shot so well, and I think it has such a cool and weird story that I really like. And I love the cast. I wish they acted like people. I don't hate it though. I ended up rating it a 7 out of 10, but I am putting it in my one-time scares category. Watching it the second time did not change my opinion, and I can confidently say I'm never watching this movie again. All right, now that half of you unsubscribed from that opinion, I am going to talk about Hereditary, which is one of my all-time favorite horror films ever, just like The Witch. I'm not going to make this suspenseful. I'm going to put it right into the all hail category because it's amazing. I've seen it multiple times. It is genuinely terrifying to me. This is a movie that actually gave me nightmares, that actually had me... I was looking at the corner in my room, and if you've seen Hereditary, you know why I'm looking at that ceiling corner, because when I think of Hereditary, that's one of the things that I think of, and I just start checking my room and making sure nobody's there. Things could be lurking. You never know. I'm not going to talk about the plot of Hereditary because it's one of the most famous A24 horror films, and I do have a spoiler review / discussion of this film, so I will link it and you can watch it and talk to me about it. But yes, it's one of my favorite horror films of all time. Next, we have Slice, which is another one that I saw the other day just to round out my A24 horror list to make sure I've seen every single film on that list, and Slice was awful. This is once again a horror comedy, but unlike Life After Beth, I do not think this works at all. It's surprising because the premise sounds really, really cool. There's this town where ghosts live just openly next to people. There are witches, there are werewolves, there's a murder mystery going on. It kind of has an 80s vibe to it, even though it's clearly not set in the 80s. It could have been so much fun. Just hearing me say this, I'm sure you're thinking it can't be that bad. It should be at least a little bit of fun. No, it just doesn't work, unfortunately, and I really wish it did. I kind of wish they just made it an 80s set film, and also that it would have just been made in the 80s in general, because I think they really would have embraced that campiness and that overall ridiculous style, that dark horror humor as well. I think it sounds like an iconic 80s film, ridiculous but awesome plot, and it just did not work out. This is going straight to my would offer a sacrifice tier, unfortunately. Next, I have The Hole in the Ground, and this movie is the definition of middle of the road because it's not awful. It's not a bad movie. There's nothing particularly bad about it, but there's nothing really great about it either. It's just something that we've seen many times before, and it doesn't really offer anything all that special. The story revolves around a mother who has a son. She's a single mother, and one day she starts suspecting that her son is no longer her son and is actually potentially something supernatural because of an incident that happened, and she doesn't know what happened to her actual son. We have seen this done before. When you're doing such a popular plot line, then you should do something interesting with it. Towards the end, it did start getting a little bit more interesting, but it just didn't do it for me. It was okay. It's not a complete waste of time. It's not awful. It has some good tension and some good scares, but overall, it's just okay. So obviously I'm putting it into the one-time scares tier. Next up, I have Climax, and this is going to be another controversial one. This is a Gaspar Noé film, and I know some people loved it and thought it was an amazing experience. I absolutely hated every minute of it. I cannot stand films that are just a nightmare for the sake of being a nightmare, and this is exactly what Climax is. It's a party with a lot of dancers, with drugs involved, and it just devolves into a nightmare. And that's it. That's the movie. I get that it's shot in a very effective way, and it really pulls you into that experience that I did not want to be a part of. I didn't like this movie. I'm putting it into the no sleep lost category because I recognize that it's not awful, it's just not for me, but also it didn't do much for me. I hated it as I was watching it, but then when I was done, I promptly forgot about it and never thought about it again until right now, or until someone brings it up in conversation or on YouTube. So that's where we are with that. We are getting closer to the end of this list, and the next movie here is High Life. High Life is a sci-fi horror film, and if you know me, you know that sci-fi horror is probably my most favorite subgenre of horror, and I wanted to love this movie so much. It looked so amazing in the trailers, and it is an amazingly shot film. It's so moody and atmospheric, and I like that type of stuff. It has a great cast, and I just did not like it at all. There's barely any plot in it, and it's all very symbolic, and it's gorgeously shot, and Robert Pattinson is actually really good in this film. Basically, all I remember is that they're on this spaceship, and they're the last survivors, and there's a doctor who is doing experiments, and they are just trying to survive. That's kind of it for the setup of this film, and it just sounds like it would be completely my type of thing, and it wasn't, and I'm very sad about it. I ended up rating it a 5 out of 10. I am, however, going to put this into the no sleep lost category. Unfortunately, I'm still really annoyed that this wasn't my new favorite movie because I was ready for it to be my new favorite movie, and just no. Then we have Midsommar. This is the second film by Ari Aster, who made my beloved Hereditary, and I think it's a great film. I really enjoyed it. It is completely different from Hereditary, where Hereditary is all dark and gloomy. This one is set in broad daylight, and it is a folk horror type of film. It revolves around grief and processing your feelings, and around a very unsatisfying girlfriend-boyfriend relationship. If you haven't seen Midsommar, I think you should absolutely check it out. It's a really, really cool horror film. They don't make a lot of films like this when it comes to horror, and I ended up giving it an 8 out of 10. This is going into my quality nightmares category. I also think this is a really good film. If you're not sure if you're into the genre in general, I think this is a pretty good one for getting into horror because it has some horrific moments, but it also has some just really nice and beautiful moments and really interesting story in general. Next up, I have The Lighthouse, and this is from Robert Eggers, who made The Witch, which we know I love. It's about two lighthouse keepers who are just losing their sanity on this remote island in New England in the 1890s. And the two lighthouse keepers are played by Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe. This movie I really enjoyed, but did not love, unfortunately. And I do really want to watch it again, actually, because I think I will enjoy it more on my second viewing. It is pretty funny, and I think the performances are what make this film, but also it eventually gets into these really weird mythology type trippy visuals, and it does eventually get into a horror territory. It takes a while, but it gets there. So I think it's a very interesting and a very unique film. I am putting this into my quality nightmares category because even though I didn't love this film, I still keep coming back to it and keep thinking about it. And as I said, I'm about ready to watch it again because it's calling to me. I know this was a big favorite for a lot of people, and I think it might be one that I have to watch multiple times in order to fully appreciate. I feel like I maybe wasn't ready for this film when I saw it. It's not like I didn't get it and I thought the mythology that they used for the visuals was really, really fun, but it kind of threw me off. I'm not going to lie. All right, only two more to go. One of them is In Fabric. This is another film where I felt like the concept was really, really cool, but it just didn't get there. It could have been such a good movie, but it wasn't fully what it should have been. In Fabric is this kind of a ghost story about a dress. It has this really cool, bizarre concept. I generally think haunted and possessed items are a really interesting element to bring into horror. However, this film was going pretty well for a little bit over half of it, and then it changed gears and it changed characters. And I don't know why they did that. I wish they would have stuck with what they were doing originally for the entire duration, and I think the film would have been better for it. I still enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I kind of expected that I wouldn't like it just because the reviews weren't that great for it, but I found it pretty interesting, and the giallo stylization of it was really, really well done. It's definitely one of the best modern throwbacks to the giallo subgenre. There's a lot of things that it does stylistically, but it just didn't do it for me. There were parts of it that were just very strange in a bad way, and I don't think the over-the-top strangeness of them worked. But the main issue was the second half of the storyline, because I don't know why they went there. It was unnecessary in my opinion. I did end up giving it a 7 out of 10. I am putting it in one-time scares. I don't think it's bad. I think it's pretty good. I think there is an audience for it. I enjoyed quite a bit of it. However, I don't think I'm ever watching it again, and I have quite a few issues with it that unfortunately have to do with spoilers, so I'm not going to cover them, but if you've seen the movie, I'm pretty sure most of us have the same criticisms of it in general. So, one-time scares. Moving on to the last movie. The last movie on this list is, of course, Saint Maud, which I reviewed recently. And if you've seen that review, you know I loved the film. It is definitely one of my favorite A24 horror films. It's a heartbreaking take on loneliness and isolation. It's an interesting take on fanaticism, but from the perspective of loneliness and isolation. It has a fantastic lead performance and fantastic supporting performances as well. It gets really dark in certain parts. It also has elements to it that make you question reality. It's a really, really good combination of things that make it into an unforgettable horror film. And I am actually going to put it into the all hail tier because even though I've only seen it once, I cannot wait to see it again. And I am 100% adding it to my Blu-ray collection because it is one of the best horror films that I've seen in recent years. I'm a big fan of it. So that is it for my A24 horror tier list. You can see the entire thing in front of you right now. Let me know how you would rank these films. What is your top 5 out of all of these? Have you seen all of these? What are your least favorite ones? Let's discuss this in the comments below. Let me know if you like this format. If you want to see more tier lists on my channel, leave some suggestions in the comments below for what you want me to tier list next. I have some ideas. I have plenty of ideas actually because I got some great suggestions on Instagram, but I would love to hear from you guys as well. And I'm already going to be plotting my next one that I should make in April. But as always, thank you so much for watching. A big thank you to all of my patrons with an extra special thank you to the patrons whose names are on the screen right now. But to all of you who made it to the end of this video, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting me with your views, with your comments, with your likes. I really appreciate every single one of you. If you enjoyed this video, which of course I hope you did, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, turn on notifications, follow me on social media. You know all of these things. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye.